The founding story for any one of your brands basically needs to be more work than you would be willing to put in again. And after, brand maintenance is a different structure of energy. My brand is focused on intergenerational media literacy, and in college, my major was learning and education studies with a concentration in applied learning science. So the concept there is that you can have your major be representative of the direction you set with your brand. Maintaining this brand might be making memes, posting memes, going to conferences, having conversations, making videos, developing websites, etc. Very loosely speaking, web languages are going to describe what humans can pay attention to. And it is possible to learn web content accessibility guidelines to make this more replicable, more reproducible. HTML for structure, CSS for styles and presentation, JavaScript for behavior and interactivity. Cheers. This might save someone a few years. If you are a self-directed learner and your eventual career doesn't require expensive equipment, you technically don't need to go to college because you can learn on your own. If you ever want to change your career and you don't know what's possible, you won't be able to. So, an advantage of going to university is that you have access to a lot of expensive equipment and people who understand how you might want to use it. This also applies to careers. If you're a self starter, you can be your own boss, but you need to actually do the things. Going into debt for college loans is a form of collateral that invests. How do I say this? You can share the experience of being in debt with other people who are also in debt. So if you're worried about the short-term benefits of being able to tell a story related to equipment that you otherwise wouldn't have access to, consider the narrative and marketing advantage of being able to describe doing something that no one else can. Cheers. Something that's strange to acknowledge as a software engineer is that it is possible to describe systems with language, and it's also possible to verify that what we're describing can be reproduced. Towards what engineering is and the reasons why we've developed the techniques that we have over centuries, over millennia, there are spaces that treat software engineering like it's mostly a way to communicate, which is one approach. It can also be a way to coordinate systems, which is a subtle difference, maybe. When we talk about the TikTok algorithm, are we actually referring to things that we can navigate? We create videos, but when we post them, are we doing that with an algorithm actually in mind? Or is that an abstraction describing that we don't understand which system we're interacting with? When I post consistently, I can acknowledge that increases the likelihood that others will see my videos. Do I actually reflect on the things that I post? Do I actually reflect on the ways that people respond to what they see? As the software industry as a whole has matured, there have been various stages of investment into the reasons why people would care. Now we have more language pardon. Now we have more language to describe how our attention impacts the economy or interacts with. We have more language to describe that there is an attention component to the economy. When we design media, pretending that attention doesn't exist is foolish. I can post as many videos as I want to, but what am I actually trying to build? My answer is a brand. I'd like to develop intergenerational media literacy so it's easier to exist in the world. My belief is if it's easier for us to communicate across generations, it will be easier to avoid the silly problems that come up because of miscommunication. I can kind of hope that making videos makes it easier for other people to watch, read the captions, consider the ideas. And I know that has happened because I've asked people have volunteered the ways my work has impacted them without me asking for it as well. And with this, there are still things that I can increment. I'm developing 4 main brands and have 42 domains. More than 42, actually. So the space of consideration that I'm intending to project into is, well, I can say it's vast, and perhaps that would be beneficial towards marketing for me to say, look at all of these things that I'm doing. But honestly, I just want to do something consistently. And I understand with modern tools, it's possible for us to scale our energy. When I went to college, I was curious how transistors worked and learned that they can take a small input voltage and direct flow of a lot of power. After reflecting on who I want to be and how burnout feels and what other systems can do to sustainably model what I've learned, after wondering about transistors, I found that if there are things that I can do per system that I care about on a day to day basis that increments each dimension per moment that I care to exercise, and I'm bumbling around finding language for this. Pardon me, I just burped. Today is March 12th, 2026, and the idea that I intend to present is engineers making videos is a good idea because if we can't describe the things people will pay attention to, we won't know. If we don't practice describing the things that we care about in a form that others might pay attention to, we might be surprised when things aren't developing. Last thing I'll say in this video is a lot of people are worried about their salaries and are going to do things that cling onto a way of interacting with technology that might be outdated. If we are investing into domestic manufacturing, in the short term, it might be difficult to acquire the same flow of stuff that we used to, but in the long term, everything might be cheaper. The kinds of things that we care about might be really easy to produce locally. It's very often more expensive for a lot of people to be homeless or out of work than it is to have a consistent stream that we all interact with. Who cares about consistency? How can it be enforced? What makes it easier? Etc. Those are hard questions. As artificial intelligence becomes more apparently useful, software engineering and social engineering will likely need to have some conversations about where they each exist. Sponsor me on GitHub if you care about intergenerational media literacy. And if you don't like GitHub, Cash App, Venmo, and PayPal also work. Cheers. I've posted thousands of videos to TikTok, and it is possible to train AI based on the things that I've described. Over the course of thousands of videos, I've gotten 60,000 likes, which is more than one, well, if a novel is 50,000 words, then assuming I've said one word per like, there is a novel of experiences described on my TikTok, and currently I haven't turned that into a book and sold it. On Book Talk, some writers will have an opinion about what it should take to make a book, and everyone has different resources. The point of my content is intergenerational media literacy, and coincidentally, if someone follows along and learns how to code, they will be able to get hired as a software engineer if that's a career they actually care to enter. I have playlists on YouTube where I'm just coding, so you can follow along with the process of an experienced engineer wondering about code. And also, since I've started making content, I've lost housing once, and it seems like I'm losing housing again. So, towards describing how I meditate on the concept of stability, I've already posted videos reflecting on what I can possibly do in the short term and how my work relates to the concept of a long term. Do I want to get better as a writer? Yeah, actually. I want to get better at navigating software as if it's literature. I have a few code bases published to my GitHub that you can read through, and part of the concept there is with version control, we can represent a history of a document. So if we publish a collection of manuscripts, we can have that be the free version, and update them whenever we've reached some threshold of income. Mathematically, the number of people who have seen my videos can have acted on them, and there is also an open source community that is inspired to respond to low-hanging fruit. So while I can publish videos that can describe how a creative person can apply the general advice in my videos to a career, for most people there's going to be a saturation point with which skills stand out for how much effort of making that skill particularly visible. One hint here is on your social media profiles or the profiles that you want to show employers, if it isn't very obvious that you're trying to solely represent the category of job that you're applying for, other candidates with more specific branding will likely stand out with more confidence. Meaning, I can have skills in both design and engineering, but if I'm looking for principal engineering roles, that's the language that I should prioritize, that I should emphasize. It might be the case that principal engineering roles are going to be looking for someone who can design, and I can demonstrate that I've considered design in the ways that I present my application. I can make websites and describe how I relate to principal engineering. Creative people still do need to do marketing, and if you're telling a story, you can have the marketing be part of the story that you're telling. Personally, I don't want my story to be about losing housing, so that's something that happens, and it's frustrating, and I'd rather describe how I'm aiming to build systems that make housing stability more likely. And also, fortunately, I have 13 years of content already planned for the story that I'm telling about myself. And I also have relationships with dozens of creators who have, over decades, described their relationship with visibility and what it's like to be a storyteller in the public eye. You can support me by sending me money, and if you have the means to, well, the concept here is I can describe what I will do to build organization profiles that companies can use to hire people. So if you believe you will need employment in the next couple of years, you can hire me for $500 to $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 for a website, and I can have structures available for your brand for when you're looking for work. If you hire me when you're out of work, you might be too stressed about your If you hire me when you're already out of work, you might be too stressed out about your short term to appreciate what can be developed. So I would recommend hiring me when you have some padding. Storytelling with your brand over years on the internet with blockchain technologies as a wave of cultural phenomena that we've already navigated. Proof of work is what you've posted. Proof of stakes is how you polish it, basically. And I've also been networking, and I've also been boosting the algorithmic channels, so there are things that I can tangibly make easier for you. Creative economies, book talk aligned marketing strategies, human development as a pacing schedule, squashy. If you're a product designer, you should be on TikTok as much as possible, going live with people who wonder about the app the same way you do. After a few years, wonder is going to develop, and some features are going to stand out as particularly useful for entertainment. Other features you might recognize existing on other apps with more depth. The point of going live with other people is to wonder about the same experience and see which dimensions you want to share. Sometimes it feels like TikTok is creating a silo, and to some extent, there are features that do, but ideally we would have enough media literacy, enough media hygiene to not just spiral into one app. if that is not what we desire. So it is possible to wonder about other structures that we can share, and it is also possible to explore different experiences while we are streaming on TikTok. If you don't know which interfaces are easy for the average person to navigate, pardon, it's very likely you're going to design experiences that are hard to navigate if you don't know which experiences people want to navigate or which experiences are easy. Now it is possible to post a link to a site, and maybe AI agents are going to be the people who visit or the visitors who visit. Without knowing who actually cares about the structures you're describing, it's very difficult to it's very difficult to design a cohesive and meaningful experience. Wonder about something on TikTok Live. Ask other people what their experience is seeing the same things you're navigating. In 2024 and 2025, I streamed for thousands of hours. Before that, I had about a dozen-year career in software engineering. In the meantime, I have been learning AI and wondering about where we are with the media environment. Now, I can vibe code a competent app live on a call. One reason I wouldn't want to is because I have brands that are live and I need to develop them meaningfully, which doesn't always mean going live is the best way to focus on developing what I have. But I have recorded videos of the way that I approach general development, and I posted those to a YouTube channel years ago. This video is for product designers who are considering modern contexts of collaborative development. If you post a set of features and describe how you specifically navigate those features, your audience might navigate features the ways you describe them just because those are the most familiar. If you describe features that others are making more familiar, we can share more language. Cheers. I identified as asexual with a willingness to be proven wrong for about a decade, and being proven wrong was mostly acknowledging that identity is complex and the ways that I care about love are different than, well, when people ask whether you're gay or straight, the question they're usually asking is different than who might you ever be attracted to? And when I would consider who might I ever be attracted to, the context of that question, of that wonder, was do I want to have the same relationship as all of the adults I've seen in my life? And the answer was in high school, there aren't many other people who I can consider having that kind of relationship with. When I consider any of the relationships that I can see around me, I don't know if that's the structure that I want. There were very few people in the course of that decade that made me consider whether the person I was spending time with could potentially be a long-term partner. And physical intimacy was something that I specifically had to learn as well. Something that was helpful there was having platonic intimacy exist and having that clarify that it could exist and physical touch didn't need to be sexualized. And part of what that helped me realize was I didn't need to identify as asexual for touch to not be sexual. An advantage of having spent this time wondering about which label was the most accurate is that I considered a lot of dimensions of relationship that it seems like not as many people consider, like the difference between romantic, platonic, and physical or sexual attraction. Different people can exist with different qualities. You can be intellectually attracted to someone. You can be familiarly, like you can be familiar with someone who grew up in your town and find them safe for that reason, or you might find them predictable for that reason, if not safe. And different needs throughout different stages of our lifetime can be significant for why we focus on whatever we do. Now I mostly acknowledge that queerness is a socio-political identity, and discussing it with nuance, caring about that, well, I mean, I care about discussing the nuance of that socio-political identity. And that's pretty much it. Like, having conversations about spiritual fulfillment is such a personal, nuanced life path. Who should you spend the most time with? Ideally, people who would help you grow. And what is growth? Is all development growth? Also, autism and ADHD have patterns in a relationship that, without having language to describe them, felt a lot more chaotic. I do value clear communication. Which communication is clear? How long do we spend in each moment? Going through high school and having subjects change and the people in each subject change and enough things to focus on and enough wonder about the future gave me a lot to focus on. Now, a lot of the other things are boring, and I am more interested in wondering about shared relationship. And also, I've experienced partnerships make it harder for me to spend time with other people. So I would rather share relationship than lose relationship. And with that, I am wondering how I can structure my current relationships to actually sustain the kind of dimension that would be fulfilling. And I'm mentioning this because that's harder without housing. And making videos like this, when I have the ability to reflect like this, we do what we can when we can, I guess. Cheers. If you study software development and try to write your own software and reflect on your own development and wonder about how you're growing, you will develop. That might sound obvious, but it isn't necessarily going to happen unless you make it a goal. You are allowed to pursue software for the money. Less now. Now it's a lot more difficult to pursue software only for the money. The reason is software existed as a high paying salary for long enough for people to describe how parts of the process could be gamified. Now there are enough people who want to navigate the gamified parts that the remaining dimensions of software engineering tend to be dimensions of software engineering that you would only care about if you cared enough about them. Dimensions of software engineering that you would only be aware of if you cared enough to actually study. In society, we have described PhDs as doctorates of philosophy. Why do we study philosophy? What's the point of so many people spending so much money only to study philosophy? Presumably, there are differences between subjects, so presumably, someone studying philosophy for however long would yield different results in a context where the goal is to produce novel results. Academia is one branch of human development or societal development, and software is another. You can study the philosophy of software, and there are a lot of resources that make different parts of that accessible. If you study the textbook Cracking the Coding Interview, then you can see how some people have recommended studying the philosophy and pragmatics of computer science and software engineering for about a decade. More than a decade now, not sure how old that book is. The main premise is when we have language to describe our ideas, we can navigate them more easily and develop them. If we don't have language to identify what we're trying to increment, we won't be able to consistently increment the dimensions we aren't acknowledging. Without language for describing systems, some patterns might scale and some patterns might diminish, and we won't be able to describe how we're attempting to navigate those dynamics. It is also possible to write software that matches the subjects that you're learning. Like you can you can create a website that's meant to be a wiki for the kinds of things that you find interesting. In the process of trying to represent something that you care about, you might notice that some dimensions are easier to consistently represent than others. You might notice that HTML is useful for representing some concepts, and JavaScript is useful for representing others. You can reflect on paradigms of programming languages and wonder about which systems are easily made into stories with each paradigm. Is it easier to reference objects in object-oriented code? Or is it easier to reference lines in procedural code? Which systems are easier to share across generations? Why is it that when we structure information in some ways, it's easier for some patterns of cognition to align with them? The engineering component of software engineering is finding consistent ways to wonder about these and scale their consideration across a society, across a across a network, a socially integrated graph. And the advantage of going to an engineering school is you can see which dimensions of rigor are rewarded by which branches of engineering typically. Cheers. If you're an artist, something you should know is most people want help believing that intrinsic motivation can be intrinsically rewarding. In this world, it's very easy to start to believe that intrinsic motivation is not intrinsically rewarding. When we paint, we spend time wondering about our senses. When we tell stories, we spend time wondering about our experiences. When we produce music, we spend time wondering about resonance and the moment. You can produce thousands of moments, but which ones are worth paying attention to? If you have a process that acknowledges time and you have a relationship with publicity, like if you put your work in a place where someone else can wonder about it, doesn't need to be publicity like the major celebrities, just for local recognition. If there are reasons why people would wonder about your art year over year, you can post consistently and return to the reasons why whatever you've made intrinsically rewards the motivation that you explored. Aesthetics exist, provenance exists, both are subjectively valuable. The ways you help other people recognize that intrinsic motivation can be intrinsically rewarding, the ways you make that accessible will be how you provide value to whomever exchanges value with you, to, with, for, etc. Also, now I have enough videos recorded of me that it is possible for someone to create an AI model. That's a strange experience. Support my work on Patreon. Basically, the videos that I record need to be more worthwhile than not recording them. And when people suspect that I'm AI, sometimes they don't listen to the things that I'm saying. I can say, I'm not AI, and someone can copy a video and say those words verbatim and pass that through AI. So the amount of time that I spend illustrating a concept needs to acknowledge that some people might reject it just because the quality makes them think it's artificial. It also usually costs me money for the resources to illustrate. It costs me hosting or visibility to get it in front of the people who would care more than just a talking head video. When I make videos and I'm not specifically expressive, people often believe I'm AI, which means the amount of effort that goes into each video needs to be worth however people might perceive it. If I spend hundreds of hours making a video and someone still believes that it might be AI, so they don't even entertain the content of the video, that would just feel like a waste of my time. So for the most part, making videos like this is the most effective use of my creative capacity. In separate threads, I do also work on traditional art, and I was working on a piece last year that was intended to be worthwhile. I currently don't exist in an environment that allows me to stabilize the art in ways that would be necessary to be more worthwhile than making videos in this format. And fortunately, part of that is because I do know other illustrators, I know other painters, I know people who have established character designs. So, if necessary, I can call on actual artists to illustrate a concept. I don't have money to pay them, and I was working on a film to raise funding. Very often, when I make videos like this, my environment rejects the concept of this being the most beneficial way to accomplish the goals that I have in my career. The main reason is the people who don't care, the people who don't care about whether I am or am not AI, have other media that they can find. So, standing out as an entity, there has to be another way to say that. Um, Being expressive is more authentic, and there's an audience that doesn't mind how I present. And I'm thinking about value. I might not, I'll think about this.